The latest thrilling spy movie almost always seems to have a scene where the hero, or maybe the villain, creates a false identity to gain access to some restricted information. Glamorous and dangerous, they make it seem difficult and laborious to fabricate the information and manufacture a new identity. In reality, though, thieves are not bothering with all the work to make a new identity. And why should they, when instead they can just steal an existing person's information to gain financial rewards? The amazing thing is they don't even need to steal your information one account at a time. No, identity thieves can target large repositories of data and steal hundreds or even thousands of people's personally identifying information at a time. When this type of information is stolen from a business or organization as a large data set or group, it's called a data breach. The Wisconsin data breach law defines personal information as an individual's last name or first initial in combination with and linked to at least one of the following elements: social security number, driver's license, number or state identifying number, financial account number, including a credit or debit card account number or any security code, access code or password that would permit access to the individual's financial account, a DNA profile, or any unique biometric data including fingerprint, voice print, retina, or iris image, or any other unique physical representation. By acquiring just a small amount of information, identity thieves can destroy a person's financial reputation and cause endless stress on a person and their family. Identity thefts cost consumers millions of dollars in fraudulent charges each year, and can take years and cost thousands of dollars to recover from. Identity theft is when someone utilizes your personal information to create fraudulent accounts. Protecting yourself from identity theft by adopting stronger cybersecurity habits. Passwords are the first line of defense in protecting you against cybercriminals. While conducting online transactions such as banking, paying bills, or making purchases, if hackers gain unauthorized access to your computer, they can view your personal information, impersonate you, and send messages to your friends, change your password, and block you from accessing your own account, steal your identity, or infect you with your files with viruses. Therefore, it is vital to pick strong passwords that are different for each of your accounts and to update your passwords regularly. Find more information on cybersecurity on the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection website, where you can find identity theft fact sheets on a variety of issues. Enroll in your Consumer Protection 101 by subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on social media. More resources are available on the Consumer Protection 101 website page at www.datcp.wi.gov.